The 22nd floor of PureDent Toothpaste's headquarters was usually a place of polished calm, shiny oak tables, city views stretching out like a painting, the air faint with coffee and cologne. But that evening, it felt suffocating. Executives in tailored suits leaned forward in leather chairs, eyes fixed on a projector screen that seemed determined to crush their spirits. Red arrows bled down the charts, sales figures tumbling lower than they had in years. At the bottom of the graph, bold black letters screamed market share decline, 17%. If you love stories that show how ordinary people rise in extraordinary ways, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because this one is about a man the world ignored, until his idea shook an empire. Arthur Hayes, the chief financial officer, slammed his Montblanc pen on the table. His hair was thinning, his forehead damp with sweat. 17%, he said again, his voice breaking. That's nearly 1/5 of our business gone. Do you all understand what this means? If this continues, we won't survive the year. Denise Walker, marketing director, looked exhausted. Her lipstick had faded from chewing at her lips, her glasses slipping down her nose as she shuffled a stack of reports. We've tried everything. Billboards in Times Square, celebrity endorsements, coupons in every grocery store in the Midwest. 3 campaigns in 6 months, and none of them made a dent. Richard Moore, head of operations, leaned back heavily, his chair groaning under his weight. Because the problem isn't marketing, he barked. It's the product. Maybe people don't trust Crestline anymore. Maybe the formula feels cheap. That's absurd, Denise shot back, her voice rising. Our formula hasn't changed in 20 years. It's still ADA approved, still safe, still effective. Consumers trust Crestline. What they don't trust is your supply chain, late deliveries, missing inventory. Don't you dare shift this on marketing. The room erupted. Fingers jabbed the air, voices tangled into one bitter knot. Some shouted about packaging, others about pricing. The CEO, Charles Whitman, sat at the head of the table, his slick silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His cufflink sparkled, his tailored suit flawless, but his face was tight, pale with worry. Enough, Charles finally snapped, his baritone voice cutting through the noise. Silence dropped, heavy and sharp. But the silence didn't bring answers. It only revealed the hollow space where solutions should have been. The door opened with a sharp hiss, and 5 consultants strode in. They were younger, sharper, wearing designer suits and carrying sleek laptops. PureDent had paid them a fortune to do what its executives couldn't, fix the free fall. One consultant, a woman with precise movements and a cool voice, began, "We've reviewed your data. The problem isn't consumer trust, it's market fatigue. Toothpaste is saturated. Competitors are innovating. If PureDent wants to survive, you'll need to stand out. New flavors. Whitening boosts. Perhaps even a subscription model." Another consultant clicked through slides. Graphs and buzzwords filled the screen: Gen Z engagement, TikTok campaigns, rebrand strategy. He said confidently, "We'll make PureDent go viral. Influencer marketing is the future. If you want sales, you have to trend." The executives leaned forward, desperate. For weeks, these outsiders pitched strategies. Focus groups were conducted. Trials were run. A new whitening formula launched, ignored. A cinnamon mint blend, mocked online. Discounts slashed profits without boosting sales. Even a flashy TikTok challenge flopped, becoming the butt of jokes instead of a trend. Every attempt failed. Every dollar burned. And every red arrow on the charts dug deeper into their pride. Through it all, David Carter pushed his mop across the boardroom floor. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, his skin a warm brown shade that glistened under the light. His uniform was navy blue, the name tag stitched crookedly above his chest. His short-cropped hair was sprinkled with gray, his eyes sharp but usually lowered. He was invisible here. The man who picked up their trash, who polished the floor they scuffed with their Italian shoes. But David wasn't just cleaning. He was listening. Every bitter argument, every failed idea, every consultant's pitch, he absorbed it all. And where they saw complication, he saw simplicity. He had worked here for years, long enough to notice things others ignored. In the staff bathrooms, he saw how employees squeezed the tubes, tiny, careful amounts, stretching each one for weeks. In the cafeteria, he overheard families joke about toothpaste lasting longer than milk. At the company store, he watched customers frown, weighing whether a tube would last until the next paycheck. David understood habits. And he saw what no one else in that boardroom could. The problem wasn't PureDent's reputation, or flavors, or discounts. People simply weren't using enough toothpaste. Still, he stayed silent. Because who would listen? To them, he was a shadow with a mop. A background detail in their empire. Not the man who could save it. The consultants kept coming, their glossy reports piling high. Weeks passed. Layoff rumors buzzed through the building. Whispers followed in the hallways, entire departments would be cut, jobs lost, futures shattered. Executives snapped at assistants, tempers boiled over. The air in PureDent grew heavier every day. And David kept watching. One night, long after the consultants had packed up their laptops and the executives had gone home with their worries, David lingered in the boardroom. The projector screen still glowed faintly, the red arrows stark in the dim light. He stood in the silence, mop still in his hand, and let the truth press against him. They're bleeding money while the answer stares them in the face. His jaw tightened. He thought about his own life, his small rented apartment on the south side, the second-hand car that coughed more than it drove, the bills stacked on his kitchen table. People overlooked him everywhere, not just here. He was used to it. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he knew something no one else in this building did. He had the key. The simplest, smartest solution to their crisis. But not yet. He wasn't going to blurt it out, only to be mocked, dismissed, tossed aside. No, he would wait. Wait until desperation left them with no other choice. Wait until they realized their millions and their consultants were useless. Then, and only then, he would speak. And when he did, they would have to pay attention. David dipped the mop back into the bucket. The water rippled, faintly catching the light. On the surface, he looked like every other night, a janitor finishing his shift. But inside, he was something else entirely. A man holding the company's future in the palm of his hand. As he left the boardroom, the voices of executives still rang faintly in his ears, angry and desperate. He walked down the quiet hallway, the scent of lemon cleaner trailing behind him, his mind steady. They didn't know it yet. But before this was over, they would all learn his name. The weeks dragged on, and PureDent's headquarters became a place of restless ghosts. Executives shuffled through the hallways with their phones pressed to their ears, voices sharp, faces pale. Secretaries whispered about job cuts in the elevators. Security guards leaned on their radios with heavy sighs, saying entire departments might be gone by Christmas. And still, the red arrows sank lower. The consultants returned with more slides, more buzzwords. Subscription plans. Charcoal toothpaste. Rebrand for Gen Z. Each presentation sounded glossy, but the results were the same. No traction. No sales surge. Just silence on the shelves where Crestline's competitors thrived. The CEO, Charles Whitman, looked thinner every week, his suits hanging looser on his tall frame. The bags beneath his eyes deepened. More often than not, he sat in meetings rubbing his temples, letting his lieutenants fight over scraps of ideas that never stuck. And in the corner of those meetings, mop in hand, David Carter kept watching. Every day, he listened to the chaos. Every day, the truth burned inside him like a secret too heavy to carry. He'd nearly spoken once, his lips parted, his voice ready, but he stopped himself. No. Not yet. The time wasn't right. They still had hope in their so-called experts. They still believed money and prestige could buy solutions. It wasn't until one stormy Thursday evening that David knew the moment had finally come. The executives were gathered late, the boardroom lights buzzing overhead. Rain lashed the windows, thunder rattling the glass. Charles sat at the head of the table, his hands clasped, his face hollow. The consultants were there too, but even their energy had drained. Their suits looked less confident, their voices less certain. Arthur, the CFO, was the first to break. He slammed a report onto the table, his voice sharp with despair. "We're out of time. We've burned millions, and nothing has worked. If we don't turn this around next quarter, we'll be cutting jobs, maybe hundreds." The silence that followed was thick. No one argued. No one even looked at each other. It was then that David spoke. His voice was calm, measured, but it cut through the room like a knife. "I can solve your problem." Heads turned. For a moment, no one even realized the voice had come from him. He stood near the corner, mop resting in his hand, his dark eyes steady. "What did you just say?" Denise asked, frowning. David didn't flinch. "I said I can solve your problem. I know why your sales are falling, and I know how to fix it." The room blinked into silence. Then, as if on cue, laughter broke out. It started with Richard, the head of operations, a sharp, dismissive bark. Then Arthur chuckled, shaking his head. Even one of the consultants smirked, leaning back in his chair. Charles didn't laugh, but his eyes narrowed, skeptical. "And what exactly makes you think you have the solution?" David straightened his shoulders. He didn't lower his eyes like he normally did. He looked Charles dead in the face. "Because I've been watching. I've been paying attention. And while you've been wasting money chasing gimmicks, I've seen the real problem." The laughter slowed, unease flickering in the room. But before anyone could challenge him, David raised a hand. "One condition," he said. His voice was steady, unwavering. "You'll pay me $100,000 before I tell you my solution." The silence shattered into chaos. Arthur's face went red. "Are you out of your mind? $100,000? You're a janitor." Denise scoffed, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Do you even hear yourself? Who do you think you are, demanding money from this company?" Richard leaned forward, his tone mocking. "This is exactly the kind of nonsense we don't need right now. A janitor playing consultant." Even the younger executives chuckled nervously, glancing at each other. To them, it was absurd. Insulting, even. A man with a mop daring to sit at their table, speaking their language, demanding their money. But David didn't flinch. He didn't back down. "I know what I know," he said simply. "And you need me more than you think." Charles studied him, his expression unreadable. The CEO had spent decades in boardrooms like this, with people far more educated and far more expensive than David. And yet, there was something about the janitor's calm confidence that unsettled him. "Get out," Arthur snapped finally, his voice sharp as glass. "Go back to your mop. We don't have time for games." David's gaze lingered on Charles for a moment longer. Then he picked up his mop, rolled his bucket toward the door, and left without another word. The room stayed tense long after he was gone. No one wanted to admit it, but the certainty in his tone had struck a nerve. And as the storm outside raged on, Charles couldn't shake the image of the janitor's eyes, steady, unafraid, like a man who knew something no one else in the room did. That night, as David walked home in the rain, his uniform soaked and his shoes squeaking, he knew they wouldn't call him right away. Their pride was too thick, their arrogance too loud. But he also knew something else: when desperation finally cornered them, when every consultant and executive had failed, his phone would ring. And when it did, they'd have no choice but to pay his price. The storm outside had cleared by morning, but inside PureDent's headquarters, the tension hadn't lifted. The hallways felt heavier, as though every polished wall and framed advertisement carried the weight of failure. Employees walked with lowered heads, clutching coffee cups like lifelines. The gossip was no longer whispers, it was survival talk. Who would be laid off first? Which department would be gutted? By now, even the most optimistic executives were silent. The consultants had returned with their laptops, their slides bright with promises that had already failed. Another round of strategies. Another set of words that tasted like ash. Subscription models, rebranding, relaunches with neon packaging. All of it cost money PureDent no longer had, and all of it collapsed under the same brutal reality: sales didn't rise. Arthur Hayes, the CFO, was at his breaking point. He paced the boardroom, his tie loosened, his face red. "We're done," he said, his voice cracking. "We've spent millions on these experiments, and we're bleeding faster every day. If we don't reverse this by next quarter, we'll be in court begging creditors for air." Denise Walker pressed her hands to her temples, her glasses tilted, her voice weak. "We can't survive another flop. We've already lost distributors. Grocery chains are cutting shelf space. If this continues, PureDent will be a footnote." Richard Moore leaned forward, sweat beading on his forehead. "We can cut costs. Shut down one of the plants. Fire half of operations. That'll buy us a little time." The CEO, Charles Whitman, didn't answer. He sat at the head of the table, staring down at his clasped hands. The silver in his hair caught the light, but his face looked older than his 62 years. The lines on his forehead had deepened in the past month, each one a scar of failure. The consultants tried one more pitch. Charcoal-infused toothpaste, one suggested, flashing another slide. "It's trending with young people. Social media influencers are." "Enough," Charles said, his voice low but final. The consultant stopped mid-sentence, startled. For a long moment, the only sound in the boardroom was the soft hum of the projector. Then Arthur leaned forward, his voice dropping. "What about him?" The others frowned. "Him who?" Denise asked. Arthur hesitated, his pen tapping against the table. "The janitor. Carter. The one who interrupted last week." The room went cold. "You can't be serious," Richard scoffed. "He's a janitor. He asked for $100,000 like he was haggling in a pawn shop." Arthur's eyes narrowed. "And yet, did you hear him? He wasn't nervous. He wasn't guessing. He spoke like a man who knew." Denise crossed her arms. "It was arrogance. He got lucky with his words. If we stoop to entertaining a janitor's fantasy, we're finished." But Charles didn't join in the mockery. His eyes had drifted toward the window, watching the city skyline blur under a haze of clouds. The image of David Carter's calm face lingered in his mind. Not defiant, not foolish, just certain. And Charles knew certainty when he saw it. "We've tried everything," Arthur pressed. "We've burned money on consultants, on gimmicks, on ads that became jokes. Nothing has worked. What do we have left to lose?" Richard muttered, "Our dignity." Charles finally looked up, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Bring him in." David was at home when the call came. He lived in a modest apartment on the south side of the city. The walls were thin, the furniture secondhand, the kitchen table scarred with cigarette burns from a tenant before him. A stack of unpaid bills sat on the counter, each envelope unopened but heavy with reminders of his reality. He sat at the table, a chipped mug of coffee cooling in his hand, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something in his gut told him to answer. "Mr. Carter." The voice was formal, clipped. "This is Denise Walker from PureDent. We'd like you to return to headquarters this evening. The board wishes to hear your proposal." David didn't smile. He didn't thank her. He simply said, "I told you my condition. 100,000 before I say a word." There was a pause on the other end. "Then, we'll discuss payment if your solution proves valuable." "No," David said firmly. "You'll pay me first. Or you'll keep failing." Silence stretched, cold and taut. Then the line clicked dead. David leaned back in his chair, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. He didn't worry. He knew they'd call again. At PureDent headquarters, the executives erupted when Denise relayed the conversation. "He's extorting us," Richard shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "This is insanity." Arthur's face, however, held a flicker of respect. "No. He knows the value of what he has. And he knows we're desperate enough to pay." Denise shook her head, incredulous. "We are seriously considering paying 6 figures to a janitor for an idea we don't even know exists." Charles raised a hand. The room quieted. His voice was calm, steady. "If Carter is wrong, we lose 100,000. If he's right, he saves the company. Tell me which risk is greater." No one argued after that. David returned to PureDent 3 nights later. The boardroom was different this time. Gone was the easy arrogance, the mocking smirks. The executives sat in tense silence, their suits still pressed but their confidence worn thin. Charles sat at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on David as he entered. David wore his janitor's uniform, the same navy blue with his name stitched to the chest. He hadn't dressed up. He didn't need to. He walked in with quiet confidence, his steps unhurried, his posture steady. Arthur slid a check across the table. The amount was clear, $100,000. David didn't reach for it. He pulled out a chair instead, sat down, and folded his hands. "Now you'll listen." And for the first time, every executive in that room leaned forward, silent, waiting. But David didn't rush. He let the moment hang, heavy and thick with anticipation. He looked at their faces, pale, sleepless, desperate. He let them sit in their uncertainty, let them feel the weight of what was about to come. Only then did he open his mouth. "I've been watching for years," he began, his voice calm, measured. "You've blamed the market, your campaigns, your competitors. But you've ignored the simplest truth. People aren't buying less because they don't like PureDent. They're buying less because they're not using enough. One tube lasts too long. That's your real problem." Gasps flickered around the table. And as the executives exchanged stunned glances, David leaned back, the faintest shadow of a smile touching his lips. The boardroom had never been so quiet. The executives of PureDent, once quick with dismissive laughter and sharp retorts, now leaned forward like students before a stern teacher. The check for $100,000 lay untouched in the center of the table, its weight symbolic. They had paid their price. Now they waited for their salvation. David Carter sat among them, still in his Navy janitor's uniform. He didn't fidget. He didn't hurry. His calm filled the room more powerfully than any consultant's flashy slides ever had. "You've been solving the wrong problem," he said again, his voice low but steady. "Toothpaste is not failing because people dislike it. It's failing because one tube lasts too long." A ripple of disbelief moved across the table. Denise's lips parted, then closed. Arthur frowned, scribbling something in the margins of his report. Richard snorted softly but didn't interrupt. Even Charles, the CEO, sat perfectly still, his sharp eyes fixed on David. David leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. Every time someone brushes their teeth, they squeeze out a small line of paste, about a centimeter. That's what you taught them with your ads. Just a pea-sized amount, you said. Efficient. Responsible. And so one tube lasts weeks. Families buy less often. Your own marketing sabotaged your sales. The words hung heavy. Slowly, Denise's face drained of color. She remembered those campaigns, the commercials, the billboards, the health-conscious slogans. All of them designed to make Crestline look trustworthy. But never once had they considered the long-term effect. Arthur cleared his throat. So what's your solution? David let the silence stretch before answering. Make them use more. Double the size of the toothpaste line. Widen the nozzle from 1 centimeter to 2. Every squeeze dispenses twice the paste. People will empty tubes twice as fast. And when the tube runs out sooner, they'll buy more. Sales will climb, not because you tricked them, but because you changed their habit. For a moment, the room was stunned into absolute stillness. Then Richard burst out laughing. A sharp, almost hysterical laugh. That's it. That's the miracle solution we paid $100,000 for. Make the hole bigger. My God, we've lost our minds. Arthur shot him a glare. Shut up, Richard. Denise leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Wait. It's simple, yes, but, she glanced at David. Would it really work? David's voice was firm. Yes. People follow convenience. They won't measure toothpaste with rulers. They'll squeeze, and they'll use whatever comes out. You're not asking them to change. You're making it easier to do what they already do. And in return, they'll buy more, faster. That's your solution. The consultants exchanged uneasy glances. One of them finally spoke. It sounds primitive. But it makes sense. We've spent months chasing trends, when the simplest behavioral change might outperform everything else. Charles still hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on David, unblinking, weighing every word. Then, slowly, he reached for the check and slid it closer to David. You've been underestimated, Mr. Carter, Charles said quietly. And I think we've just been handed the only solution that hasn't failed. Arthur leaned back, exhaling heavily. We can test it in limited markets. Adjust production lines, widen the nozzles on the new batch. If sales increase even 5%, it'll be proof. Denise's fingers drummed against the table. Not 5%, she whispered. If he's right, we're talking about doubling sales turnover. Richard, still skeptical, muttered under his breath. But even he couldn't disguise the flicker of unease in his eyes. Because deep down, he knew, it was so simple it just might work. The weeks that followed were a blur of frantic adjustments. Factories retooled production lines, engineers recalibrated machines, and the first test batches of PureDent toothpaste rolled out with wider nozzles. Marketing prepared fresh packaging, nothing flashy, nothing that hinted at change. Just toothpaste, as always. But this time, when consumers squeezed the tube, twice as much came out. At first, no one noticed. Families brushed their teeth as they always had, children smearing bright blue paste across their brushes, parents in a hurry squeezing without a thought. But within a week, tubes emptied faster. Within 2 weeks, households were buying again. By the end of the month, sales figures ticked upward for the first time in nearly a year. Inside headquarters, Arthur burst into the boardroom one morning waving a report. His voice shook with exhilaration. It's working. Pilot markets are up 12% in 3 weeks. Distributors are asking for more stock. We're finally climbing back. The executives erupted, not with arguments, but with relief. Laughter broke out, the first real smiles in months. Denise dropped her glasses on the table and rubbed her eyes, tears threatening. Richard, red-faced, muttered a half-hearted, well, I'll be damned. And in the corner of the room, David Carter stood quietly, his uniform the same as always, his expression calm. But in his chest, his heart beat steady and proud. He had been right. He had saved them. The turnaround spread like wildfire. By the next quarter, PureDent sales had doubled. Shelves that once gathered dust now emptied faster than distributors could refill them. Competitors scrambled, slashing prices, launching gimmicks, but none of it mattered. PureDent had shifted the game with one quiet adjustment. And behind it all was the janitor no one had believed in. Charles called a meeting weeks later, not in panic this time, but in triumph. The executives gathered in the same boardroom, but the energy was transformed. There was life in the air again, laughter, even pride. At the head of the table, Charles rose to speak. PureDent was on the edge of collapse, he said, his voice carrying across the room. We hired experts. We spent millions. We tried everything, and failed. But one man saved us. A man most of us overlooked. A man who taught us that wisdom doesn't always wear a suit. He turned, his eyes landing on David. Mr. Carter, from this day forward, you are no longer our janitor. You are the new head of product control. You have earned your seat at this table. Applause filled the room, hesitant at first, then louder. Arthur nodded firmly. Denise even smiled. Richard clapped slowly, grudgingly, but clapped nonetheless. David stood, adjusting the hem of his uniform, and for the first time, walked to the table not as the man who cleaned their floors, but as the man who had saved their future. And as he sat, the boardroom seemed different, less polished, more human. Because they all knew the truth, the man they ignored had become the man they couldn't do without. The transformation of PureDent was nothing short of remarkable. Within months, the company that had been on the edge of collapse now surged ahead of its competitors. Sales reports no longer glowed with red arrows but pulsed upward in green. Distributors who once threatened to drop the brand now begged for more stock. Even skeptical investors, once circling like vultures, returned with renewed interest. But inside headquarters, the biggest change wasn't on the charts, it was at the boardroom table. For the first time, David Carter walked in not with a mop, but with a briefcase. He wore a dark gray suit, crisp white shirt and a tie neatly knotted at his collar. The janitor's uniform that had defined him for years was gone, folded away at home like a relic of another life. As he entered, the room fell into a respectful hush. Charles Whitman, the CEO, rose from his chair. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice filled with pride, "meet our new head of product control. Mr. David Carter." Applause echoed across the room. Some executives clapped with genuine warmth, Arthur's palms rang loud and steady, Denise's smile brighter than it had been in years. Richard, though reluctant, joined in too, his expression tight but his hands not idle. David nodded once, his face calm, his voice low. "Thank you. But this is not about me. This is about PureDent. We were blind because we stopped listening. We forgot that solutions don't always come from the top. They can come from anywhere, if we're willing to see them." The word struck a chord. Even the consultants, once so confident in their glossy ideas, lowered their eyes. David didn't settle into his new role quietly. He brought with him the same sharp observation that had saved the company in the first place. He walked the production lines, spoke with workers on the factory floor, listened to distributors, even visited stores himself. He insisted that PureDent would never again overlook the small details, the habits of ordinary people that shaped billion-dollar outcomes. And the staff noticed. For the first time, they saw an executive who didn't walk past them without a glance. He remembered names, asked questions, and listened. Word spread quickly through the building. The janitor had become a leader. And with him at the helm of product control, the company felt different, less arrogant, more human. Not everyone embraced the change. In private corners of the building, whispers floated. Some executives grumbled that it was humiliating to take orders from a man who once cleaned their trash. Richard, in particular, found his pride bruised. "One idea," he muttered to Arthur one afternoon. "One idea, and now he thinks he belongs at this table." Arthur only shrugged. "One idea saved the company. That's more than you or I managed." But even Richard's bitterness couldn't overshadow the results. PureDent was thriving. Consumers didn't question the new nozzle design, they embraced it without thought. Children squeezed fat lines of paste on their brushes, parents refilled their bathrooms faster, and retailers rejoiced as inventory moved twice as quickly as before. PureDent was alive again. One evening, after another day of back-to-back meetings, David lingered in the boardroom. The city light sparkled beyond the glass walls, reflecting against the polished oak table. He stood by the same corner where he had once leaned on his mop, listening to executives laugh him off. He smiled faintly. So much had changed, but he hadn't forgotten. He thought of his small apartment, where the stack of overdue bills was finally gone. He thought of the long hours he had once worked in silence, his ideas locked inside him. And he thought of this truth: it wasn't the mop that defined him, nor the suit he now wore. It was the mind that had always been there, waiting to be heard. Charles entered quietly, breaking his thoughts. "You've done well, David," the CEO said. "Better than any of us expected. You didn't just save PureDent, you saved people's livelihoods. Families still have jobs because of you." David turned, his eyes steady. "I didn't save PureDent alone. The truth was always here, waiting. I just spoke when no one else would." Charles nodded, respect in his gaze. "That's the difference. You had the courage. Never lose it." The following quarter, PureDent held its annual shareholder meeting. Cameras flashed, journalists filled the hall, and the company's turnaround became the headline of the season. When Charles introduced David to the stage, the applause was thunderous. Reporters scribbled furiously, investors leaned forward, and employees watching online cheered in their break rooms. David stepped to the podium, his voice carrying across the room with calm authority. "PureDent was close to failure," he said. "Not because of competition, not because people stopped caring about toothpaste, but because we stopped paying attention to people. We forgot that every product we make is used by families, by children, by people who live ordinary lives. If we want to thrive, we must never forget them again." The crowd erupted, not just in applause, but in belief. That night, as David returned home, he walked past his old janitor's cart in the corner of the building. It had been polished and preserved, not thrown away. On its handle was a small plaque that read, "Never underestimate the overlooked." He paused, his chest swelling with pride, then walked on. The janitor who had once been invisible was now the man PureDent couldn't live without. If this story moved you, don't just stop here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs reminding that greatness can come from anywhere. Because the next David Carter might just be the person you least expect.